Yeah. Hello, everyone. I hope you are well. My name is Atlyn. I'm the host for today's session, which is all about the fear of giving and receiving feedback in the workplace. And I'm joined today by Monika. Hi there, Monika. How are you doing?
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you. All good.
Great. And also by Carol Hay. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Carol, how are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm great and honoured to be here also.
Oh, fantastic. So today we've got 45 minutes to take a deep dive into this topic that I hope is relevant to all of the people here on the call today. We are going to be receiving questions at the end of the session, so do feel free to post those in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. So today we're going to be looking at the benefits of constructive feedback. And why is there fear around feedback? You know, it's a positive thing, right? So why do we have kind of fear around this thing? Looking at tips, you know, we want people to come out of this session today kind of being able to enhance the way they give feedback. So we've got some tips around how you can deliver feedback in a constructive way. And, you know, what to avoid when giving feedback. So there's also obviously the positives, but also maybe what you should be avoiding when you're giving feedback. And how can we empower others? And what is the role of the employer? Okay, so those are the kind of top areas we're going to take a look at during this session today. It is recorded, so if you have to jump off or if you want to share it with colleagues afterwards, we will be sharing the link later. And also we're going to have some resources to share with you as well to help you on your journey to giving constructive feedback. So let's kick off then. What are the benefits of giving constructive feedback? Well, it can help you to understand your actions and how they're perceived by others, and to identify what you're doing well, along with the areas for improvement. So that's the kind of top thing. I'm actually just going to share my screen now, which I should have done before. So just bear with me just a minute, please, while I do that. Because I'll be talking, and you won't have anything to look at. Just bear with me just a second. I think you probably wouldn't want to look at my face the whole time either. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, let me know if you can see that. Is anyone there? Can you see that, Monika and Carol?
Well, it's still buffering, so it's on now. Great, we can see a PowerPoint.
Wonderful. Let me just put it into slide share mode. Sorry, guys, about that. Okay, great. Hopefully that will be loading correctly. Okay, so we were talking about the benefits of constructive feedback. So the first point I made was that it can help you to kind of help to understand how you're being perceived by others, right? I think that's a really key thing for us to think about, kind of the perceptions and how people are seeing us. Okay, so there we go. Gosh, jumping ahead now. There we go. So the next thing on here is it can increase morale and motivation by recognizing and rewarding good performance, right? So I think, you know, when you get constructive feedback and it's positive, it can really help you to feel motivated. It can also promote a culture of continuous learning and development. So within a workplace culture, you know, if you're kind of used to having this process of giving feedback, I think it creates a really positive culture in the workplace. It can also strengthen your relationship and foster trust and open communication. So I've really found this with my managers over time that, you know, once we've kind of got that trust between us, we can have really positive conversations, and I'm really open to hearing their feedback and going to take that on board to kind of change the way that I work. So I think it really does go a long way in terms of building that trust and those relationships in the workplace. It can also help to just generally overall increase performance within a team and within the organization, so that you can kind of address the problems that everyone's facing in a timely and effective manner. So obviously as an individual, you know, your performance has an impact on the overall performance of the organization. And so by getting feedback in terms of how your work and what you're doing impacts the organization, it can have a real positive impact there. So I think for me, I've built some really good positive working relationships, not just with my manager, but I think others in the business as well. So I think when it comes to feedback, it's not just always around your manager. I think colleagues can also be really valuable in terms of giving you valuable feedback. And so it's also really great to build those relationships, not just upwards, but also sideways. Okay, so what happens if you don't receive feedback? I think, as well as kind of looking at the positive side, there are some negative things around feedback. And if you don't get it, I think it can be really hard for some people to understand and perceive how their actions are affecting those around them. Quite often we maybe haven't got that level of self-awareness, and we're so focused on what we're doing that we're not having the opportunity to look outside and seeing how those actions are impacting others. So by receiving feedback, we can do that. So that's one of the things that you'll be missing out on if you don't receive feedback. I think in terms of areas for improvement, this can also be a concern if you're not getting feedback, because it can hinder kind of personal and professional development. And we all want to progress and be on a journey of continuous improvement. And so without feedback, it can be difficult to do this. I think in terms of DE&I, a sense of belonging really can come from that interaction with others. So I feel that if you're not receiving feedback, it can make you feel kind of isolated and disconnected from others. And maybe they're just not invested in your growth and success. I don't know if you've ever felt that you've asked for feedback and you haven't really got a very good response, and it makes you feel like this person just doesn't care and they're not really interested in what you're doing. And so this is, again, one of the things that can happen if you're not receiving feedback. And then lastly, again, as some of you may have experienced this, but frustration and demotivation, really. I mean, if you're working in a vacuum and you're not receiving feedback, it's not really motivating. And sometimes you just haven't got the guidance or the direction that you need to really fulfill your role effectively. So these can be all the downsides of not getting the feedback within the workplace environment. But then why do we fear it? And why do we receive fearing feedback? If we know that it's such a good thing and can have a positive impact on us, why do we fear receiving this feedback? And I think there are a number of reasons for this. I think the first one being kind of a fear of failure and disappointment. People may be afraid that the feedback they receive will be negative and reflect poorly on their abilities or their performance. So no one wants to hear bad news, right? So this could be one of the key reasons why people kind of fear receiving feedback. I think that ties into the next one, really, in terms of fear of criticism. People may be afraid of being judged or criticized for their actions or mistakes. And again, this depends on the delivery. Okay, we shouldn't really be criticizing people as a form of feedback, but people have a fear that they may be put in that situation. Also, a fear of conflict. People may be afraid of confrontation or disagreement and may avoid seeking or accepting feedback in order to avoid potential conflict. And again, it's not a great conversation if you're having it and then it kind of goes to that kind of conflict stage. No one wants that with their manager, to have this kind of disagreement, stroke argument happening in the workplace. It could be linked to a lack of trust. If people do not feel that the person given the feedback has their best interests at heart, and they may be hesitant to accept that feedback. And I kind of mentioned this in the previous slide. I think that trust is really important, to be open to receiving the feedback, but also to feel that that person's got your best interest at heart. So that kind of needs to be established for that fear to kind of go away. It could be linked to kind of insecurities. People may be insecure about their abilities and may fear that feedback will highlight their shortcomings or weaknesses. So we all can't be good at everything, right? There are definitely going to be weaknesses, and these are the areas in which we try to improve. But if someone's going to highlight that during feedback, then maybe that's a reason why we would fear kind of hearing that, because we know that what they're saying is true. So that's kind of really playing into your insecurities. And then lastly, a lack of experience. People who are new to an organization or a role may be unfamiliar with feedback or the process, may not know how to handle or respond to feedback. So again, I think when it comes to new kind of joiners in your organization, or you're a new manager for somebody, I think, again, it takes a bit of time maybe to ease that person into the process of giving feedback. So I want to kind of hand over to Carol now and ask her a question. You've had to deal with many situations and stakeholders on all levels. Has there been a time when you've had any anxiety or fear around receiving feedback? And if so, how have you overcome that?
I think, yes, across my career, because of the type of organizations I've had, and the roles that I've had where, you know, in one case working for an organization that was owned by over 30 countries. In theory, you know, you kind of had 30 bosses because each destination was a stakeholder. And of course, they all had a different purpose for why they were there and what they wanted from their regional organization. And there were times when I found being in the type of environment where I had to receive feedback quite stressful. And for my own mental health and preservation, I kind of had to really break down what was stressing me. And part of it was that sometimes there were no clear objectives. And if there were no clear or recognized objectives where everyone agrees, these are the objectives or the metrics by which we're going to measure, then when you're in that kind of scenario, you found that you were being, I suppose you could say, given feedback based off each person's need or each, in our case, destination's need. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't helpful. But as the organization became more structured and we worked with our stakeholders to develop the key performance indicators, then when we were going through a type of feedback or evaluation process, we were able to stay focused and to focus only on what we were measuring. But because of those clear measurement guidelines, the feedback is then related to not whether you like me or not, that's immaterial, but whether I could deliver or not. And we got to the stage where once we took away all the gray areas, the delivery was there, and it turned into a very long and fruitful relationship that went over a decade. So in looking at feedback, yes, there is fear for the reasons that Atlyn mentioned and more. And I think one of the main reasons for fear is the outcome. Sometimes people are going into an environment where they're going to receive feedback. And because there have not been clear objectives or measurements, they're not sure what the outcome will be. So even for ourselves, if we find ourselves in any situation where during the course of it, we're going to receive feedback, from the beginning, from the get-go, we need to ask for clear markers, indicators as to exactly what the feedback will be measured against. It allows us to keep focused and also ensures that when you get into that environment where feedback is taking place, a lot of the fear has been removed because you can focus specifically on what you have been working on right throughout the year. So organizational culture is important. And certainly within the organization, we need to ensure that the structure is in place. If we work for ourselves and we run our own businesses and we get to the point where our client is reviewing as to whether they want to continue with us again, we do the same thing. We be very clear on what the markers were, on exactly what we're being measured for, so that even if they decide they do not wish to continue that relationship with you, you can walk away knowing why the relationship is not going to continue, what you will have to do better the next time, and grow from the experience. So it's really about knowing what we have to deliver, agreeing on it, and framing the feedback process so people stay focused, stay on track, don't take us down a road, don't introduce things that were never introduced before. Stay focused and have agreement as to what it is we're all trying to achieve.
Well, Carol, that was fantastic. Covered so many really important points there to consider. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it really kind of works quite nicely in terms of the next set of questions and thoughts, which are all around the best ways of delivering feedback. So, how can we avoid some of the things that Carol just mentioned? I think the first thing which she kind of said was around being specific, to provide specific examples and details to support your feedback. So if you've got a metric, you can use those examples to really support the feedback that you're giving in a very specific way. To be timely, So to deliver your feedback as soon as possible after the event or the behavior in question. So there's no point giving feedback kind of weeks and weeks after the incident has occurred. We should really be trying to give feedback very close to it, so it's fresh in people's minds. To be objective, to try to focus on the behavior or the action. So as Carol said, not on the person herself, and whether you like her or not, that's just totally irrelevant. Let's focus on what those metrics were, and let's be objective in terms of focusing on those actions. Use the I statement rather than you did this wrong. Try saying, I noticed that you did this, it had this effect. This can avoid defensiveness and that conflict that we mentioned earlier when you use the I statement rather than the you word. So I think that's something to consider in terms of your language. And as I mentioned before, avoid criticism. Try to focus on the positive aspects of the person's performance and provide specific suggestions for improvement rather than criticisms. And again, if you have those metrics up front, it's quite easy to direct the person to specific ways in which they can enhance their performance. To be open to discussion, to encourage the person receiving the feedback to share their perspective and engage in a dialogue about the feedback. So any discussion around feedback should be two-way, right? It's not just you kind of giving feedback or them giving it to you. It should be a two-way discussion where you can kind of both share your perspectives and come to a shared understanding. Follow-up is also something that can really help you to deliver feedback in a good way. Check in with the person to see how they are incorporating the feedback, to see if there's anything else you can do to support their development. So if you really are, concerned and wanting to make a positive impact, checking up and checking in on the person afterwards is a great way to do that. And so, Monika, I'm going to come to you now. Obviously, you manage a diverse team of people remotely, all of whom work in really fast-paced roles and have a direct impact on your customers. But through your experience, what have you learned are the best ways to motivate your team and to encourage continuous improvement through feedback?
Hiya. So yeah, I've got about 10 people on my team. Most of them, well, I work from home. So for me, my team is very important, and the relationships and how we look after each other is very important for me. And I make that obvious every time I speak to them. So I have regular meetings with them once a week, 1-to-1, and then a group meeting where we all get together and trying to keep it positive as well. So my main goal is building the relationships with these people. So I try listening more than talking. I think that's always good, so that you don't overpower the person and you get as much out of them in that time that you've got with them. I want to get to know them personally. I want to get to know their strengths. I want to get to know their abilities and what they like doing, what they don't like doing. So that's really important for me. The more I talk to them, the more, they kind of ease into it, and we build a lot of trust in there as well. So trust is really, really, really high on my, agenda, because being a busy team, we need to know that this other person's got your back if something was to go wrong. And I believe in being honest as well. So whenever something doesn't go so well, I will point it out, and I'm not going to blame anybody. Just say, this is a fact, something's not going wrong, not going right even. So just being honest. And, there's no surprises. So whenever I get someone on board, someone new, set their expectations from the interview to setting up their goals for the year, setting up their goals for the quarter, or even for the week. So they always know where the end goal is, what to expect before they even start. I think that kind of helps with building that kind of relationship and what to expect, and then where they're supposed to be, so there's no confusion really. So to me, everyone should know where they're going and be happy with the role that they're doing. So there isn't anything that is not motivating them, and we discuss all of it, so that's the main thing, keeping that going.
Thank you, Monika, for sharing that. I mean, I do think kind of your focus on building those relationships is really key, because I think it kind of leads in to everything else. You're able to have those conversations. And if you need to discuss anything difficult, perhaps, then you've got a good foundation to do that. So, Carol, it'd be great to bring you in on this one. You've been instrumental in progressing the careers of many in the travel industry. What can others do to kind of empower, coach, and to guide young talent in the industry through feedback, especially for those from underrepresented groups?
Well, first of all, we have to give them the opportunity to actually get through the door, because if they're not in certain environments, then you can't give them feedback. So it's very important that for those of us who work with organizations, that we ensure that they have strong, fair DEI programs so that everyone can get into the organization. And once people have the opportunity to enter an organization, if they are underrepresented, then we should ensure that there's a level of support for them, because sometimes just being new, just being underrepresented, whether it's in your age, your gender, your orientation, your ability, it can be a bit daunting. So once we've created the type of environment where people think that there is a level playing field, if we see young people and we think they need the support, before we can even go into feedback, we need to start with the coaching and the mentoring, because it's difficult to be giving people feedback if we haven't actually given them guidelines as to what is expected. So once they have those guidelines, then we're better able to then support them, give them advice, give them feedback. Now, one thing I have learned, Atlyn, is that not everyone wants feedback, not everyone is open to feedback, and quite frankly, some people just want to be left alone. And those are some of the things that we, the coaches and the mentors, need to also understand, that not everyone is open and receptive. And if they are not, we then come across as being meddling. We think we're perfect and we want everyone to be like us. And so I have coached, trained, and mentored many persons in my life, and the feedback hasn't always been positive, because sometimes people think that we're trying to turn them into us. So it's a process, and we have to work with people, and we need to understand that we all have different levels of abilities. So I'm often told by people, gosh, you're so fearless. And then on the other hand, I'll meet other people who they are so afraid and so scared and in such doubt, that I realized that I had to manage myself in how I engage with them, so that I go along with them at their speed rather than trying to take them along at my speed. So if we see people within an organization or a group or a setting, and we think, yes, we really want to help that person, yes, we can give them feedback, but we may even need to explain to them what feedback is. Because not everyone understands what feedback is. And then once we've explained what feedback is and the impact that it can have on their development, once they know how to work with it, then we can get into our role of coach or mentor or ally or big sister, whatever is relevant. And then we can take them through the process where when they receive feedback, they know how to handle feedback. Because I'll just close with saying that I can remember when I was much younger and I received feedback and I would respond. And I was told, you're being defensive. And I think that is still a gray area in feedback. We need to work with people to be able to respond to feedback. So when they state how they feel, they're not being told, you're not listening, you're being defensive. When we give someone feedback, it doesn't mean that they have to accept it or they have to agree with it. And sometimes when they don't accept or agree, we try to drill our point home through reinforcement. But the more we reinforce is the more defensive that they become. And then we get into an area of conflict.
Yeah.
So it's a process that we have to go through. And we need to understand that not everyone understands feedback. Not everyone understands what to do with feedback. So our role is not only to give feedback, but to create the environment, give feedback, and work with the recipient so they know how to deal with feedback to move themselves along to the next level.
Yes, I mean, that is, Jen, just so perfectly aligned with what we're going to talk about next, because I think what you're saying is some of the challenges that people have had giving feedback, it hasn't been received positively, which can create a fear around giving feedback even. So imagine it's not only about receiving it openly, but it's also about not having a fear around giving it. And so some of the reasons why people may actually not be so maybe hesitant to give feedback, as Carol just mentioned, is that they fear that conflict. If the person is being defensive, then maybe, I don't necessarily want to go there and give them feedback that I think would actually improve their performance, because I fear that conflict and what I'm going to get coming back. Or maybe, obviously, Carol mentioned she's very confident and very fearless, as people have described her. But others maybe lack their confidence in their own abilities in giving constructive feedback, and maybe afraid of saying the wrong thing or being perceived as unqualified to give feedback. So someone may feel insecure in themselves, which makes them not feel very confident about delivering feedback. And I think I've seen this a lot around kind of key DE&I themes, actually. You know, people are having to give feedback to maybe someone who is from an underrepresented group. Maybe there's this fear in terms of not knowing how to kind of have that conversation, how to talk about menopause, or that may be linked to performance issues or other areas around maybe disability, and people having to talk about accessibility and able to work more easily. Maybe as a person, you're not confident in having those conversations. So that's something that you could look at. But maybe that's what's giving you fear around giving feedback to that person and having those conversations. And maybe it's a lack of training, because I do think people need training in this area. And maybe your organization hasn't given you those skills. So maybe you haven't received adequate training on how to give feedback effectively. And maybe it's around damaging those relationships. So perhaps you have built a really good relationship with somebody and you're afraid of damaging that by giving them feedback that will ultimately help them. But it could be received negatively, and which could have a negative impact on your relationship. And then lastly, maybe retribution or retaliation. Maybe you're having to give feedback upwards to somebody or to a stakeholder, as Carol mentioned earlier. So maybe there's this fear around what will happen when I give this feedback. What if it doesn't land very well to someone who's in a position of power? And maybe they could retaliate and do something that's going to impact me in my working life. Maybe I won't get a future contract, or maybe I won't get that promotion if I give this bit of feedback. So as well as people having a fear of receiving it, there's also this fear that people have around giving feedback for all of these reasons. So Carol, just coming back to you then, in terms of that, the piece around relationships. So relationship building has been a key area where you've really excelled as a prominent figure in the travel industry. You know, are you able to share any tips on how people can share feedback with stakeholders and colleagues in a constructive way that doesn't damage relationships or bring any form of retaliation, especially if the person you're giving the feedback to is in a position of power?
Yeah, do you know what? I think a lot of this is where emotional intelligence comes into this. You know, if someone's going through like a redundancy process or something within their organization, then on top of it, we come with, I've got some feedback for you. You know, you'll literally get punched out the way. So I think we really need to use our emotional intelligence and our social awareness so that when we are getting into this feedback mode, we're really aware as to the type of environment that we're going into. So feedback has to be scheduled at a time when it will be received. I won't use the term well received because we don't know how it will be received, but certainly we need to create an environment for where feedback can be received. And in giving feedback, I've said, and I will just restate, it's about knowing the framework. the key performance indicators, the metrics. We've got to know exactly what we're dealing with, because sometimes feedback can become quite subjective, based off the cultural environment, what's happening. People are going after promotions. You know, there are a million reasons why it can sometimes be subjective. So it's always about really knowing what are the desired outcomes. What do we really expect to come out of this process? How can we shape the environment for that? And also, we need to let people know what we're going to do with this feedback. Because sometimes people don't even know what we're going to do with it. So what's going to happen now, you know, is a type of question you get asked. And it can be, well, this is what's going to happen. It could be, this is really great. We know that you're interested in growing with the organization, or it can be their areas of concern. We may, you know, it depends on what the feedback is. But whatever it is, we've got to create the right environment for it, not be in a hurry, give people their privacy, give people their respect. Don't let them feel like a sideshow, guarantee them the confidence, state what's going to happen after this whole feedback process. It could be nothing. We could be continuing as we are, or some follow-up action may be necessary. But whatever it is, we state it clearly so the person doesn't have sleepless nights thinking, what's going to happen next? Or what's going to happen to me? Is my job in jeopardy? We always create the type of environment and end on a positive note. And that positive note can even be, the next steps are. So at least they know what the next steps are, if there are any. And a caution, we must be careful not to use this position of where we're the ones giving feedback. Don't use it as a position of power, where literally we're saying to people, right, you wait till I have to do your next review or whatever. No. You know, and sometimes we see that happen, you know, so we don't abuse the power. And if we're the one that's receiving feedback, it's adjusting our minds to, at the end of the day, I want to grow and I want to do better. So I want to hear what they have to say to me. And after I have been given that feedback, I will take the time to also share my thoughts about what the next steps will be. It's important to understand that even in receiving feedback, we are in control of our destiny. And if we get feedback that we like, we don't like, we're happy, we're not happy, do something about it. Don't stand by the water cooler and tell everyone how upset you are with that person, because you're also kind of breaking your own confidentiality. And it means that there may be a time where the same people you're talking about, the negative feedback you receive, you and them could be going after a promotion of, you know, the same promotion or something. So we have to protect our own, confidentiality, and also use the feedback, determine what you too want the next steps to be, and share that with the person giving the feedback, so that not all the decision making is on them, but they also understand what the desirable next steps are for you also.
Yeah, certainly, Carol, some really good insight there. And for anyone that's listening, if you have any questions, do feel free to add them to the chat. As we get towards the end of the discussion, we will be looking at those questions and providing some answers. And we've got some really good experts here that can provide some good insight. So please do start popping those into the box now if you have any burning questions. So kind of what Carol was referring to there was when feedback is not necessarily constructive. So kind of what does that look like? So really and truly, it's not constructive when it's not specific, when it's not actionable, and when there are no suggestions for improvement. So like Carol said, those next steps, they're not in place. So that becomes kind of very not very constructive for the person on the receiving end. Feedback that is based on a personal bias, right, or a prejudice is also not very constructive. Okay, so in terms of, we all have personal biases, but when it comes to giving feedback, we really need to leave those kind of at the door. It's important that feedback is objective and focuses on the behavior or the action rather than the person themselves. And lastly, that we deliver that feedback in a very respectful and professional manner. So kind of, as Carol was saying, that you're not using it to kind of leverage and to showcase your power, but it's coming with good intent behind it. So these are just some of the things that maybe you've experienced in the past that are really considered to be not constructive. And I think as all of us who want to kind of help and empower others, I think these are some of the things that we really want to avoid. So Monika, let me ask you, have you ever been on the receiving end of feedback that wasn't constructive? And is there a way that as the individual in that situation, you can turn it around and kind of make that conversation a bit more positive? Any thoughts to share on that, Monika, from your experience?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, since Carol said, everything about the feedback, and it seems like we've got this feedback as it's bad news. I think it doesn't have to be. I think when we talk to our people, when we talk within our teams, when we talk to different stakeholders within the company, praise them, say thank you to them a lot, so that will set the ground, that will set the relationship. So when you do have something constructive, hopefully it will be well received. And I feel it's, you need to learn from it. Like we said, we need to understand why it's important. Why am I saying that to you? Because it doesn't fit in with the larger company goals, or it doesn't fit in with the why, or it doesn't fit in who we are. So, I don't have kind of feedback for the sake of having feedback. It's only because something is not fitting in well, and they need to learn from it. Do you know what I mean? So we need to have clear path, clear goals set, and then know how we can build from it as well. So what do you need to do next time? So even better if. And I think the not clear feedback, not constructive feedback, may be perceived as personal attack for some people. So you think, oh, they're out to get me. So what I would say in those situations is address that behavior. So if someone says to you, well, that wasn't very good, was it now? So you'll say, well, when you said that, I felt maybe not so well. What would you like me to do in the future? Say it. Don't be afraid of it. I mean, we're all working there together, and we're trying to work together better. So we don't want anything to be vague. We don't want any, things that are not said, and anything that is kind of under the table, not pointed out. So instead of going by the water cooler and talking to people and getting all sorts of different views on it, point it out there and then. Just say, when you said that, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? Don't stew over it, because we've all been there. We could get sleepless nights and thinking, where's this going? Just point it out. What do you need from me? Because I'm not really understanding where this is going. So if you're not sure, I think we should be really made clear, whether it's your boss, whether it's your stakeholders higher up in the hierarchy. Avoid anything being vague. For me, that's the worst.
Yeah, exactly. We all want clarity, right? And if we haven't got it, then we should be confident enough to ask for that. If they're giving feedback, they should be able to give you the clarity that you need to be able to make a change, if that's what they're expecting from you. Yeah, so that's really positive. Thank you, Monika. I know it often sounds easier than it is in reality, but I'll definitely urge people to seek clarity there and then. But one of the things that we had spoken about was this personal bias and how it can kind of have an impact when you give feedback. And this is all about kind of our own self-awareness and being aware of our own biases, right? And I think it's something that we can all take a lesson from, we can all learn from, because we do have those biases. And many organizations are now doing kind of unconscious bias training. But I think at all times we need to always be reflective in terms of, am I saying something because of my own personal bias. And if we're unsure, I definitely should seek out multiple perspectives. So, if you've kind of got a difficult conversation coming up, why not speak to someone who you trust to get another perspective on that before you broach the person to have that conversation? Maybe then you can bring that clarity to that discussion and not be ambiguous in terms of where it's going, because you have sought counsel before giving it. As mentioned many times before, focus on the behavior or the action and not the individual. But also, be brave to seek feedback on your own biases. Maybe we know that we're biased towards a certain gender or towards a certain ethnicity. Maybe we know that already in ourselves. We can see that through the representation in our organization. So maybe we can seek feedback on that and have an open, honest discussion with that before we move on to kind of managing others and giving feedback. And lastly, seek out training. People are here today listening to this conversation, which is fantastic. But, if you are wanting to kind of be a person that can give constructive feedback, it pays to seek out the training. It pays to kind of maybe get feedback from the person you gave feedback to. And how did you find that? Was it helpful? And are there areas in which maybe you can improve what you're doing? So let me just ask Monika another question then. I mean, in terms of the personal biases, how do you ensure that biases don't creep into your work and impact your decision making and interactions with colleagues? Kind of what are the things that you do to ensure that doesn't happen in your work environment?
Being in charge of a larger team that, or larger organization that I'm working with, I think I'm looking to create a safe space for everybody. What I want is everyone to be open and inclusive. And what that takes then is, again, building those relationships with different people, understanding what they might be worried about or might not be worried about, and really not tolerating anything. If I see anything, we need to call it out, and we need to say, we probably, all this content is so helpful, Atlyn. I can't thank you enough, because everyone is learning and we always are learning. And I think we have to start somewhere, and we can't shy away from it, because whether we know it or we don't, we do have some kind of bias that we must be, or I think probably are, trying to avoid in those. But when I speak to anybody, just point it out. Do you think this was not right? You shouldn't be thinking like that. Simple situations, maybe storytelling, how that would make them feel if that was done to them, because that would highlight it. And if there is something wrong, there has to be consequences, I suppose. If you said something really bad, you need to be pointed out again. I believe, as I said with my previous question and answer, that we need to point stuff out. Don't hide away from it. Don't shy away from it, because if you let stuff go, you kind of fester. So the tolerance will breed the permission, and then it will just escalate into something different. So I feel, point it out, stop it there and then, or help to stop it. If you don't have the materials and understanding, reach out to Atlyn, and she'll have loads of training and resources there for your bias.
Yeah, we certainly have got resources. The time has really flown by. I know Carol has to jump off the call in a few minutes. But the last point I really wanted to make before we open the floor to questions, and Carol has raised this a few times, is around kind of the role of the employer. And I think, there needs to be a framework in place, and that all employers should have these things to make the feedback process much easier. I think having scheduled one-to-ones, so Monika mentioned this already in terms of having them weekly with her team, but I do think if you haven't got one-to-one scheduled on a regular basis with your manager, it becomes very hard to find opportunities to give feedback. And as Carol said as well, timing is really important. The culture in the workplace, culture takes time to build and embed, but I think you want to have a culture where continuous improvement and feedback is something that just is natural to your organization, as well as respect for each other and for colleagues. Training is essential. If you're not getting training within your organization, that's something to consider and to ask for it as well. I think we all need to be improving, and we can do that on our own, but we also can get support with that. Wellbeing champions are a really good place to go if you feel like, things are not right in your organization, you haven't been treated fairly, implementing them in an organization, but also reaching out to them as well. And then lastly, policies and guidelines. We all need to have those objectives, those metrics, those KPIs to know what the rules and regulations are within your organization and your industry. And so having the right policies and guidelines are also extremely important. So Carol, I know you have to jump off now, and I'm hoping that we will get a few questions. I can't see any in at the moment, but if you do have a question, do please pose it into the box now. And then if Carol has to jump off, then Monika or I can answer that question. But I mean, Carol, you've given us some amazing insights today. I really appreciate all the nuggets that you have shared. I'm hoping that people are going to go away today and kind of really think about some of the things that we mentioned, and it will help them in their relationship building and with their discussions with their colleagues going forward, both from the person giving the feedback and receiving it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the call today. Did you have any closing comments, Carol, at all?
I think the final comment I say to people, particularly when we speak about DEI, is that we're not doing anyone a favor. It is the law. Okay, there is the diversity, I think it's the Equalities Act.
That's right.
That now covers every single aspect that we can currently think of. So organizations need to understand that when they have a DEI policy, they're not being trendy or fashionable. It is the law. And we're seeing an increasing number of court cases where organizations are losing against employees because they have not complied with the law in ensuring that we cover equity and equality in the workplace. So we need to be ensure that we know the law, we understand the law, and then we build our programs to ensure that we are compliant and that we create a harmonious workplace where we feel free to share and to give feedback.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on, Carol. I think, there is the Equalities Act, and it can be very helpful for colleagues who are having a bad experience. But I think workplaces over and above that can do a lot more to create not only equity and equality in the workplace, but a sense of inclusion and belonging. And this is really what I think this empowerment and this feedback is really about, that people feel a sense of belonging, that their organizations really care about them. So, as well as I urge organizations to look at the Equalities Act, I'd also like to think they go above and beyond the requirements that are of the law and really are doing everything they can in their power to create an inclusive culture within their workplace.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, brilliant. So just to say, thank you, everyone, to Carol and to Monika. I really appreciate you both joining me today. And if anyone has any feedback for me in terms of the session, I'd love to hear it. Please do message me via LinkedIn. We are drafting a newsletter that will cover some of the points in the webinar today and some other helpful information and resources that you can download, a scorecard that you can use to help you to give constructive feedback. And also the date for our next webinar is the 21st of March. And we're going to be talking about how to engage colleagues on the topic of DE&I. I find some people finding it difficult to engage colleagues from across the business in terms of DE&I. So we're going to give you some tips in terms of how you can get all colleagues on the journey with you. Okay, well, everyone, thanks again so much. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Atlyn. Thank you, Monika. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, bye.
See you now. Bye.
Bye to everyone. Thank you.